Hi, I'm Callum from Retro Power. Since 2020 we've been doing a weekly walk around our workshop called the Uncut series, where we show the progress on the various projects we're working on. We thought it would be really cool if we edited together all the segments that relate to each individual project into one series, so you can actually follow the build of an individual project start to finish. So that's what we've done. Welcome to the Dream Car Build series. Finally got to the end of the fiberglass body kit filler work misery on the Chevette. It's been a long old slog. It's basically that stage we probably talked about before, where it's almost sculpture, trying to make a fiberglass kit that is in no way dimensionally accurate in any part, actually be dimensionally accurate, fit the shell properly, all the components fit together properly, and you pretty much end up, sculpting all of those joins and mating surfaces again to actually make the kit fit properly. But we got to the end of that last week, in fact earlier this week, and got the kind of first all over single colour coating on, which is always a bit of a morale booster when you kind of get to see it all one colour. You can see the wood for the trees, and it's a bit more plain sailing now, where it's essentially just blocking down through finer grades on this polyester coat that we've got on it now on the exterior. With that done, the guys are now working on the underside and the inside. So I think yesterday and the day before they've done the underside, so all of the seam sealing work. A little bit of filler work as well, just where there's the odd little distorted area. We want it to look nice underneath as well, so a little bit of filler work on the underside just to iron out any wrinkles on the underside. And then they're just working on the inside, same process, smoothing out any imperfections and critically seam sealing everything and just keying everything up. Motorsport builds tend to be harder on the inside. I mean, a lot of the cars we're doing, they're fully upholstered, so we just give them basically key everything up and then go over with U-Pol Raptor or a similar polyurethane coating, which is really tough. But obviously on a motorsport type build like this, where it's going to be largely bare inside, you've got to properly prep everything to get a decent paint finish on the inside, which in a lot of cases, especially when there's a roll cage in there, isn't the easiest job in the world. So I don't really envy Gaz's final paint job on the inside of this. But yeah, good progress on that. All the panels are now in polyester as well, so it's finishing all the prep on the inside, starting to block down that polyester on the outside and on all the panels, and then they'll work towards probably then doing the Raptor on the underside, and getting the whole shell then in a epoxy primer, which is the last step before final paint.
To the Chevette, which is in polyester, which I think it was in polyester last week, with the blockings going well on that. Most of that is now shaped. The bulk of it's getting very, very close. It is literally more sanding, unfortunately, and getting gaps right. Most of the gaps are pretty good now. Gaz has been working on Gaz and Steve have been working on the inside, just tidying up any last little bits of weld that weren't quite tidy, putting some build primer in places on the inside, getting all that prepped and ready for the inside paint, and seam sealing on the inside. Then on the front end, James has been doing a bit more work on the headlights. We decided that the projector units were mounted a little bit far forward aesthetically. They were a little bit too far forward. With a bit of jiggering around with brackets and altering of things, we worked out we could actually mount them about 15 mil further back. So James has modified his brackets to mount the lights further back, but then had to do quite a lot of messing around with the brackets to be able to get the adjustment that we need, because we've got to be able to adjust them fore and aft, up, down, left, right, and adjust the bezels up, down, fore and aft, left and right, so that we can not only adjust the headlights correctly in the car, also adjust the beam pattern, which is set by the adjusters actually on the projector units. But as you do that, it obviously moves the actual projector unit lenses up and down, and they sit quite tight into the bezels. So we've got to be able to move the headlamp assemblies and the projector units and the bezels to get us all the adjustments we need and have everything fit up to the bodywork, which is a bit of an organic state due to the fact that it's fiberglass and doesn't fit very well. There's a lot of reshaping needed. So getting all that to work has involved quite a tricky task and quite a lot of going around in circles and head scratching. But James has now got the final brackets in aluminium, with scope for adjustment in every plane that it's required in, and has trial fitted them on the car with the 3D printed temporary bezels that we made just to check that everything was going to work. They will be replaced by final aluminium machined ones when further down the line. But he's trial fitted all that lot, and very happy with how all that fits now. So we're getting close to being able to sort of sign off the front end prep to be good for paint. There's obviously more stages yet. The car's got to be epoxy primed yet, and there's a little bit more finishing work before it can be epoxy primed. But it's certainly stepping much closer to that point now.
And I don't know whether they're working on the Chevette right now, but we got to a bit of a landmark point with the Chevette. Kind of finally got to the end of all of that polyester block sanding and got epoxy, and it's that kind of rapid snowball effect from there on. It feels like you've been climbing a huge mountain and then basically you just slide down the other side. So Gaz did, I think, three batches in the booth earlier this week, so 2 batches of panels. There's a lot of parts on it with all the body kit parts and the shell itself, so now everything's in epoxy primer. That's the final coat before we wet sand that, ready for final paint. So I think the next step is going to get the shell in the booth again, wrapped to the underside, and then I don't know whether we'll be painting the inside first or wet sanding the epoxy on the outside first, but certainly it's going to be reasonably rapid from now to completed paint on that. Really looking forward to seeing the first sort of final coats of paint go on. So hopefully we might see, I would guess by next week, something is going to have some final colour on it.
And then finally, I'm going to point at the paint booth, even though there's no point really pointing at it because the lights aren't on in there, but the Chevette progress. Gaz and Steve have been working on the Chevette, and that's now, previously I think it was in its epoxy high build primer where we left off last time. That's now had the undercoating of U-Pole Raptor applied. That's black U-Pole Raptor underneath, which is what we do on basically all the vehicles. That's now on, and then we lacquer that as well. Seems a bit overkill under a car, however, and yes, it probably is. The big plus of it, it's easy to wash. For the sake of not an awful lot of pounds worth of lacquer, it just makes it look a bit nicer in the short term, but it means that when you jet wash the underside of the car, the dirt just washes straight off. It's much easier to keep clean, and it's a bit of extra protection as well. Not that it really needs it. With the zinc metal spray and the U-Pole Raptor under there, it really doesn't need a lot else anyway. But with the lacquer as well, it just keeps it looking a bit nicer, makes it look a bit shinier, and it's easier to wash. So he's done that. He's then raptored any internal cavities that needed in, which is basically chiefly the inside of the rear quarter panels. That gives us an amount of sound deadening without putting sound deadening in there, seals up any small little seams and things that are very high. Sometimes it's hard to seam seal. The seams in the wheel arches, for example, are sealed from the underneath of the car anyway, so there's not really much point sealing them from inside the car, but if you raptor inside the quarter panels, that seals them anyway, so that does quite a neat job of that anyway. So he's wrapped it inside the quarter panels. Obviously there's masking and unmasking going on all this. There's masking up to do the Raptor underneath, and there's demasking, then there's remasking to do the Raptor inside the quarter panels, then there's demasking, then there's remasking again to do the final paint on the inside of the car, which is now done, and that's done in the final. I can't remember which black it is. It's black, but I can't remember exactly what black. I'm not very good on colours, but basically the final paint is now done on the inside of the shell. So the next step now is we've got a sealing coat on, as far as is practicable and possible, we've got a sealing coat on all of the outer bodywork. Actually, Gaz, thinking about presumably engine bay next, are we?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just check with Gaz, because I was about to say we're ready for wet flatting the outside of the car, but we're not actually. He's going to paint the engine bay next, because the engine bay is all prepped. We won't be wet flatting that. There's no point wet flatting that. That will be dry flatted. Then paint the engine bay. Once the engine bay is painted, yes, any areas of potential bare metal that only has primer on, or any seams or anything else that could get water into, are then sealed as much as is possibly practicable. We'll then wet flat the outside of the car, and then that'll be the final paint on the outside of the car. Prior to that, and I think we'd have covered it last week, obviously at the primer stage, it had a final mock-up of all the panels, which is pretty laborious and pretty time-consuming, but basically put them all back on again. Final check that everything fits because the next time they all go together, they'll all be in paint and it's too late.
Gaz and Steve are working on the Chevette, so it's literally the home straight now, so they're just doing the final sanding on that epoxy on the outside. The inside's painted, I think it was last week though, and the engine bay prep's all done, so I would imagine next week that shell will be completely painted, and then we can move on with fitting all the bits you saw at the beginning of the video. So really excited to see that rolling. I need to in fact order the tyres for that, and we need to get the wheels painted so that we can get it completely buttoned up, axles in, rolling, engine in, gearbox in, and get it ready to go off to Simpson later this month. And I think at that point we shall leave it.
And on that subject, we have Chevette, which is finally painted. That's now resplendent in its final black, and it's looking pretty damn good. I'll let the footage speak really, rather than me. It's a really nice job. We've got the panels to do yet; they're still to come. We're juggling a couple of jobs in the body shop at the moment, so we're picking up one and putting down another a little bit. But yeah, the Chevette body shell is now all resplendent in final colour, and that's ready because we will be putting the running gear into that imminently. The body panels have all been mocked up on that, bear in mind, at this stage. They've all been on that up to as far as the final epoxy primer coat. So they were only a wet blocking away from their final gaps, i.e. the final gaps are all set. So the fact that the panels aren't with the shell at the moment doesn't really matter from a gaps point of view. We know all that will go back together as intended. So the body shell is now going to progress through and go to assembly so that we can get that rolling, and then that can go to Simpson Race exhausts for the exhaust fabrication work. And in the meantime, we can do the panel prep without the car. Well, finish panel prep, they're almost prepped, but just finish off the panel prep and get them painted. Then as soon as the car's back from Simpson, we can panel it up and finish assembling it. So that's all in hand. Going back to cars rather than construction, the Chevette, which has progressed very rapidly from, I think you only just saw it being painted last week, to now being rolling with engine, gearbox and axle all in. We were sort of careful to have all of that lot ready to just bolt in because of the schedule we're working on. It's actually going tomorrow to Simpson Race Exhausts to have the exhaust fabricated. But it's looking pretty awesome just on its wheels here with no body kit, no panels on it, Mad Max style. But yeah, it's gone really well. So can't wait to get that back and then be able to get stuck into the build process on this. Start bolting shiny bits on, which is always everybody's favourite part of a car build, is where you've put all the effort in and you start seeing the whole thing come together. So really excited to see that happen. We painted the wheels. There's another thing that went wrong this week. We painted the wheels for this, the Revolutions, 9-inch rears, 8-inch fronts. Plenty of time ready to get it rolling, and then realised that the tyres we wanted, there was a massive back order on. So we're waiting, I think we've got a 3 or 4 week wait for certainly the rear tyres. Luckily, the chap we built another very similar Chevette for a few years back has got a spare set, his wet, so I went over to his house last night, borrowed his spare set of wheels, or one of his spare sets of wheels, so we can just get it rolling to go to Simpson. In lieu of having the tyres that we want to fit onto the black wheels that we've painted. But yeah, in another week we should have this back and we can crack on with the build, so exciting on that. Over there's a selection of the wings from the Chevette, which that's the only bit of bodywork progress that we can show you really this week, which is because the rest is it's top secret stuff. But he's raptored the inside of the Chevette wings so that they're now ready for blocking on the outside, I believe, and then final paint on the outside, so that they can then go on when the car comes back. Obviously, that, as you know from last week, that's down at Simpson Race Exhaust at the moment, having the exhaust manifold and system built. So that'll be back. Then we can start on putting bits like that together. Well, we can start putting the car together basically in full, regardless of just the bodywork. wandering on through, I'll just slide this little box out of the way. We have Chevette, where Gaz has been busy in the paint booth, painting the panels for this week. He's been finalising the prep and getting all the panel work painted. So now we've got doors, wings, boot, and I think side skirts painted, and he's just got the bonnet and the front bumper still to paint, because you get to the point where there's too much in the booth. You can't paint a full panel set in there in one go, because it just ends up being sort of mission impossible in there. You're trying to dance around things, and at some point something's going to end up getting an airline dragged across it. So he's painted the panels in 2 batches. He's still got to finish just paint the second batch, although they're prepped and ready to go. So yeah, he's literally just been putting the doors on. But yeah, really happy with the paint finish. We've just done a paint gun upgrade, which I don't know whether we've mentioned on previous episodes, but we've just done an upgrade, and I've now just forgotten what is it? It's an Iwata
WS400, I think.
Iwata WS400 Pro, I think, gun, which we're really happy with. We've used SATA guns for a long time. We're very happy with those. But we had an issue with the SATA, and while we were waiting for the repair on that, we decided it had earned its keep. We've had it for quite a few years, the SATA gun we were using, and we've had it for quite a few years. And decided that we were probably due a bit of an upgrade, and had a little play with one of those Iwatas, which I've just completely forgotten the name of again already. But we had a play with that, and we're very happy with the demo one. So we've bought one of those now, and Gaz is really happy with that. And I mean, the finish on this has come out incredibly good. What lacquer is this done in now? This is Max Mayer 320 high solids, yeah. Ultra high solids. Yeah, so it's a Max Mayer lacquer that we've used on this, a Max Mayer 320 ultra high solids lacquer. And we're really happy with that. The finish is absolutely perfect. It's as good as it's likely to. In the real world, where people show all sorts of shiny pictures of getting their perfect reflection in lacquer in a paint booth, it's easy to do that. But looking at this now, I can say I don't think you would get a better finish out of a gun. I think you would struggle to get much better than this. It looks extremely good. So we're really happy with that setup. And yeah, get the final panels finished. And we're pretty much there on paint for the Chevette, and it's going to be through to assembly hall and start getting a few significant bits bolted together. So I think that probably rounds things. Yes, sorry, yes. Yeah, it's just as well Jamie's here to remind me about things, because I have a sieve for a brain. I'm going to stand at the front, which Jamie will cut a clip of this in anyway, but I'm going to stand near it anyway, just to delight in the shine coming off it. But yes, of course, the other significant thing this week is this car returning from Simpson Exhausts. I hadn't actually seen this since it had come back, but yes, Matt Simpson's done his usual work. As always, and done an absolutely beautiful job of the exhaust manifold and system. And yeah, the quality speaks a thousand words. You know, there's no point me going any further. I'll just let the pictures do the talking. Absolutely superb job. Can't recommend them enough. Simpson Race Exhausts.
And next thing, the Chevette. It's probably the moment we've all been waiting for. Gaz and Steve finished all the paintwork on the removable panels last week, and so we were able to finally see it with all its arches and everything together, which I say it a million times here. People are probably sick of hearing me saying it, but it's one of the most ridiculously amazing transformations when you look back at when this car arrived, which actually is in one of the uncut series, so it must be in one of the earlier ones. You can see it when it arrived, sort of bright yellow, really narrow, high up, sort of old lady shopping car. And the transformation to how it sits now is just amazing, really. You sort of forget how it looked originally. So excited now to just get on with the build work on it. The seats arrived today from Motor Drive, carbon fibre seats. We had a mock-up one which they lent us during fabrication, so we've already fabricated all the metalwork in the car, knowing that these seats will fit. But these are the final ones. They've got our logo embroidered into them, but in black against black, so it's subtle. I mean, that's the theme throughout this car. We've called it Project Vader from the start because we really want everything to be black. So the wheels are going to be black. I know it's a controversial choice, but pretty much everything on the car will be black, just with the odd, very small red detail. So there's a red stitch on the seat. There'll be some red anodised parts like the extinguisher button on the scuttle, a couple of red anodised parts in the engine bay, but essentially it's black on black on black.
I'm standing next to Project Vader Chevette, which is looking quite impressive in here now. We've brought that in. That's going to be moving into the new assembly shop on Monday morning, and yeah, we're going to get cracking on with getting that assembled. We've got a variety of parts waiting to go on. There's a few bits we still need to get, but the bulk of it's here already waiting to go on. The first stage of that is that the car's through here now, ready for Max from Bremax, who does all the main sections of all our wiring looms. He's coming here tomorrow to do the initial wiring layout. Carl's getting that prep for Max to get the initial wiring layout done in this, so that all the connections for the power control, the PDU and the ECU are all sorted, and all the main loom sections. We'll be putting the small termination looms onto all of that, but Max and Bremax do all the main sections of loom for the car to a very, very high standard. It's one of those jobs where it took us a long time to find a company that could do that work. We used to do that work in-house, and it's taken a long time to find a company that would work to the right standard, and Bremax certainly do. They've been excellent. We're really very, very happy with that. So that's the first stage, is getting the wiring loom underway for that, and as I say, it'll be coming through Monday morning, and it'll be back into the assembly mix. Chevette, that's what we've also been progressing with. I was obviously mega excited to get it through here, out of paint and ready to crack on with the build. Monday, I think it was, Max from Bremax came over, did all the measure up for the wiring loom, so he's now cracking on with that. As is always the case, we kind of planned the wire routing when it was at the metalwork stage. So for instance, the reason this wing is removed is because there's a wire routing down here, comes out from the PDU, which is mounted on the inside of that kick panel, through a grommet here, along these bosses that are welded to the wing, back in through this grommet. There's bosses across the front. So all of the wire routing has already been planned and provision made for it. So it's just a case of Max coming out, measuring everything up, seeing what connectors are needed on different parts, and going away, doing the schematic, the drawing for it, and actually constructing the wiring loom itself. So looking forward to seeing that all come together. Scott has been working on various parts which sort of relate to electronic components, actually. We're using Motec electronics on this, so it's got a Motec, I think it's C127, probably got that wrong, dash digital display, which will sit above the steering column. It's got a Motec engine ECU and a Motec PDM, 15-channel PDM, and then a Motec keypad. The keypad's going to sit on the tunnel more or less where it's lying there at the moment, but on some little billet machine brackets that'll raise it up above the handbrake master cylinder. The idea there is it falls to hand nicely, but it'll also slightly hide the plumbing to the handbrake master cylinder, which will make that whole installation look a little neater. There's also going to be some CAN bus button pads on the steering wheel, and we won't be having any stalks at all, so that relates to a job Scott's been on with this week. He's been remaking the upper outer column for the Corsa electric power steering unit that's in it. So it's a Corsa B electric power steering module, and the upper column normally has a plastic piece on the top, which is the switch gear, the column switch gear, and it also holds the upper column bearing. So what we do is, on this one, and we've done it on another car before where we got rid of the stalks, we make a complete new tube for the upper column, machine a little bearing housing that's welded into the end of it with an internal circlip groove, so we can circlip a bearing into the top there, and also incorporate the mount that bolts it to the dash into that. So it's just a completely clean unit then, has no kind of OEM complicated unnecessary parts, and also we weld the mount onto the top of that for the digital display. So this week Scott's made that entire upper column piece, bearing housing, got it all welded up, done the mount for the display, so we've got the mount for the Motec piece on there, and then that's now been removed to be painted. Also, on the subject of electronics, he's been doing the panels that sit in each kick panel area to mount the PDM, the ECU, and the power steering ECU. Now, if you remember the metalwork phases of this car, we made CAD drawings and mock-up plates or locating plates that allowed us to weld the bosses into the kick panels. And this is where that technique comes into its own, in that we drew the sort of hole spacings for the mounting bosses, drew a mock-up panel that had big cutouts in it next to each boss, so you could literally bolt the bosses onto the panel,
hold the panel up, but the access holes allowed you to then weld those bosses in with the panel in situ. Those panels are then removed and discarded because they were just welding jigs. But because we've got a CAD file with the hole centres, we can then generate the CAD file for the final panel, which is another thing Scott's been on with this week. So he CAD'd up and plasmid out the aluminium panels that will mount the components I talked about. Made up the bracket that straps the power steering ECU onto that one. This one's got some holes for riv nuts that the Motec units bolt directly to. Once we were happy with all of that, he's just given them a good sand and then basically brushed a 320 grit brush finish into them, ready for anodising, which will go for anodising with the bits of UTAR that need anodising. Also did some finishing on the headlamp brackets. This car's going to have Hella xenon units, bi-xenons, 4 of them at the front there. We'd already done the mounting brackets for them, but they just needed the final metal finishing and brushing ready for anodising, so they'll be going away for anodising as well. So that's pretty much where we're at. I know I got a picture earlier this week from Richard Stubley at Autodesk. He's just about finished machining the centre console unit, which is the brake and clutch reservoir and the surround for the gear stick as one kind of complete unit. So I'm really looking forward to getting that here, and that's really what we're waiting for to send off all of that anodising batch. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. We're going to crack on with the general build work on that, and we'll see where we're at next week.